In this PowerPoint for Chapter 1, I will highlight some of the key areas discussed in the text. To start, when we talk about substances or drugs, we need a framework to accurately identify what the term psychoactive drug means. Oftentimes, the term drugs or substances brings to mind only illegal substances. Based on the text, this would be a misperception, as both illegal and legal substances can actually fall under the term psychoactive drug. So, in the treatment field, when we are referring to psychoactive drugs, we are actually referring to any substance, legal or illegal, that affects thoughts, emotions, and/or behavior and can alter consciousness. The text presents 5 basic principles that apply to all psychoactive drugs. The first is that the use of a substance does not automatically mean someone has a substance use disorder. This idea can often cause confusion or misunderstanding because social messages often present the idea that any use of a substance, especially an illegal substance, means that a person has a quote-unquote problem. The process in diagnosing a person with a substance use disorder actually involves looking at many features in many areas. Many people who use a substance do not fall under the category of having a substance use disorder, and not everyone will progress in their use to develop a disorder. The second principle is that every drug has multiple effects. This refers to the idea that all psychoactive drugs act on more than one place in the brain and impact other parts of the body. Third, as the text states, amount matters, meaning both the size and quality of a drug's effect depend on the amount the individual has taken. While there are other factors to consider with this issue, what this principle looks at is the relationship between dose and effect. Fourth, the full effect of any psychoactive drug depends also on the individual's own history and expectation. More specifically, this refers to factors such as how long a person has been using a particular substance and the belief a person has in how they might be impacted when they ingest the substance. The text gives an example that when a person believes that alcohol will make them more social and extroverted, that the person can end up being much more talkative and outgoing after consuming just a small amount due to their belief. Every individual will have a different history and expectation of the substance, and, while sometimes surprising to believe, this does play a part in the full impact the substance will have on the person. Lastly, drugs per se are not good or bad, meaning the substance itself is merely a chemical, and the chemical itself is not good or bad. Again, this is often seen as controversial because on a societal level, we are used to hearing that certain substances are good while others are bad. However, generally the real concern around substances pertains more to the way they are used. In addition, there's actually more concern about the behaviors that can stem from use, the possibility of a substance use disorder developing, and the consequences that can arise from its use. Moving from the definition and principles of psychoactive drugs, we want to take a look at what social concerns surface around psychoactive drugs. In a sense, the idea of the quote-unquote drug problem. This actually can be more complicated due to the fact that humans have used, for thousands of years, psychoactive drugs for therapeutic as well as recreational uses. So there is a need to differentiate between uses that contain some therapeutic, medical, and/or cultural or spiritual use versus quote-unquote drug use concerns. Historically, we have often asked questions and looked at research in areas such as who, what, when, where, why, how, and how much as it relates to specific substances and their uses. Often, the use of these basic questions can help us get a more detailed and accurate account of substance use and can help to avoid tendencies to overgeneralize, stigmatize, and stereotype. In this attempt to get more accurate information, even with investigational or research studies, there are inevitably many hurdles to obtaining a realistic overall picture of substance use. A factor in these hurdles stems from research data that is generated. Too often, there is little information regarding the source of the data, as well as how difficult it can be to obtain more than just superficial information on a range of issues. For example, with topics such as trends in substance use or terms to use when discussing substance use, Within research itself, there can be confusion regarding what really constitutes a trend at both a local and a national level, as well as confusion over how a term is really defined and its accuracy. Too often, these challenges result in the perpetuation of inaccurate or misinformation. A related hurdle is in how historically we have obtained information pertaining to substance use and those impacted. Survey questionnaires have largely been the main source due to how easy they are to use and their flexibility in use. However, there are significant drawbacks involving who is selected and the potential inaccuracy of the self-reports. Coming back to the topic of drug trends, this has been and continues to be a main area of interest in both a society and academic research. In general, two areas are identified: prevalence of use and perceived risk and availability. When looking at trends, the factors of correlates to use and antecedents to use surface. A correlate in regards to trends in substance use is trying to identify what factors seem related to substance use. A correlate does not imply a cause, but merely identifies a possible relationship between the two. Focusing on substance use, two common correlates that are investigated are what we refer to as risk and protective factors. Risk factors such as the availability and access of a substance and having friends who use have been connected to higher rates of use, while protective factors such as having negative perceptions of substances and the potential consequences with use have been connected to lower rates of use. However, here again there's much more to the picture. What can be a risk factor to one person may actually be a protective factor for someone else. For example, when working with clients, I have had many who mention that being a parent is a protective factor. Likewise, I have also had parents who share that the stress from being a parent results in a risk factor for substance use. So it is very important to identify with each client what their own protective factors and risk factors may be. Other correlates when looking at trends in drug use can be more controversial. The text mentions correlates of social class, gender, and others. However, a question arises if these are valid correlates or more connected to stereotypes and misinformation concerning substance use. A final area to look at in drug trends is the factor of antecedents. An antecedent is viewed as a factor that occurs before someone begins using substances. While these are still not causes to substance use, some have looked at factors such as aggressiveness and poor academic performance as existing before a substance use starts. In addition, there has been studies done on the quote-unquote concept of the gateway drug. This generally looks at the progression of use from a substance such as tobacco or alcohol to what is perceived as a more dangerous substance such as cocaine or heroin. In this case, the tobacco or alcohol would be the gateway drug as perceived as initiating a person into a more dangerous substance. So, looking at correlates and antecedents in connection to one another, we are often trying to understand two motives. First, what influences, encourages, or motivates a person to try a substance, and second, what factors or influences become a type of reinforcer, or positive reinforcement, for the person to want to use it repeatedly. Meaning, what is occurring that increases the chances for the person to start using a substance and keep using it. The text identifies three main spheres of influence for these areas: individual, community and family, and societal. Looking at examples within each sphere helps us, as a provider, to gain a deeper understanding into which factor, or combination of factors, can play a role in someone trying a substance, as well as the continuation of its use.